This is this is 5.3 factoring day 1. It is a first day of a 3-day lesson. We're going to focus first on how do you factor numbers to find the greatest common factor. I would say this first slide, you just have to write the topic down, and then we'll just work on these two problems where you can just watch. So what is the greatest common factor of 9 and 12? So you think about how can you factor out 9 and 12, what's the number that goes into both of them the greatest? So if we think about 9 can be broken down into 3 times 3. And 12 can be broken down into 4 times 3. It can also be broken down into 6 times 2. The number that's the greatest in common is 3. So we call this the greatest common factor, which is 3. Let's go over to this question on the right. What is the greatest common factor of 6 and 12? Well, if I break down 12 as 6 times 2, and I break down 6 as 6 times 1, the greatest common factor is 6. So for short, we call that the GCF. Next example, don't write this first example down. We're going to focus on the first method of factoring. Before we do any other method of factoring in this chapter, we always want to look for the GCF. What is the greatest common factor of all of the terms? So let's look at 8x minus 2. What is the greatest common factor of 2 and 8? 2. So we're going to divide out 2 from this expression, 8x minus 2. So the 2 is going to go in front. Now, when I first teach this, I say, let's divide this by 2 and this by 2. What am I left with? So I'm going to say 8 divided by 2 cancels to 4. So I have the 4 there, and then the x. Now I take 2 divided by 2. I'm left with 1. So my final answer with factoring out that problem is 2 parentheses 4x minus 1. If I want to check it, I could distribute that 2 back through the two terms, 4x minus 1, and I'll be back to 8x minus 2. What I do want you to write down is this second example, part B. (6x cubed minus 54x). What is the GCF of 6x cubed and 54x? So we say, what can we divide into just the 6 and the 54? Well, I can divide both of them by 6. I can also take out an x. So this is going to be my GCF for this problem. Now I'm going to figure out what I'm left with. So I'm going to divide both of them by 6x. Let's see what I'm left with to put in that parentheses. Well, 6 and 6 will cancel. An x and an x will cancel, so I'm left with now an x squared, and that's gone. So now what's inside in this first term is an x squared. Now let's go to the next term. I take and divide 54x divided by 6x. Well, the x's will cancel because I'm dividing that out. And then 54 divided by 6 is 9. So I'm left with x squared minus 9. Down the road in this lesson, we're going to continue factoring this parentheses. You haven't been taught how to do that quite yet. So right now the GCF is 6x. I'm left with x squared minus 9. All right, let's move to the next question. Try and see if you can do this question on your own. Question C. Figure out what is the greatest common factor of 10x cubed minus 5x squared. All right, you should have gotten, as your GCF, you can take a 5 out of 10 and 5 evenly. You can also take out an x squared because there are 3 x's in the first term and there are 2 x's in the second term. So I'm going to divide out 5x squared from this term and this term. So now let's see what I'm left with. So 10 divided by 5 is 2. And then I divided x squared out, so that cancels, and now I'm left with a 1. So now I'm left with 2x to the first. Next term, 5 divided by 5 is 1. X squared divided by x squared is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Again, you can check these by distributing the 5x squared through. You don't need to do that, but if you want to, maybe just in your head. If you distributed the 5x squared through, you'll be back with your original 10x cubed minus 5x squared. All right, last question on this slide. A little bit different. We have 3x times x plus 4 minus x plus 4 times 4. So our GCF looks a little bit different than the last couple examples. So let's think about this is one group, and this is another group. What is in common with those two groups to find the GCF? Well, what's in common is this x plus 4 and this x plus 4. So that's what I'm going to pull out as my GCF. Now what am I left with? If I divide this side by x plus 4 and this side by x plus 4, let's see what cancels. This x plus 4 and this x plus 4 cancels. This x plus 4 and this x plus 4 cancels. So I'm left with then 3x, the minus, and 4. All right, we're going to go on to method 2. Method 2 is when you have 4 terms. When you have 4 terms, we're going to focus on what we call the grouping method. So go ahead and write this problem down. Now I'm just going to rewrite the equation again. And I'm going to group 2 terms and 2 terms. So I'm going to group these first 2 terms together and these first 2 terms together. And now what's going to happen is I'm going to do the GCF a few times within each group. So let's look at what is the GCF of the first group, y cubed minus 4y squared. What can we pull out of that 2 terms? I can divide out y squared. So what I'm left with is a y minus 4. I took out y squared out of the first term, so I'm left with just one y left. I took out the y squared here, so now I'm just left with the negative 4. Let's go over to the second group. In the second group, the GCF is 2. So now I'm going to divide the terms by 2. So if I go here, I'm going to take 2 out of there, so I'm left with just now y. I'm going to divide this by 2, so negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. I've done the GCF to both parentheses groups. Now here's what I'm left with, and will happen every time when I do the grouping method correctly. I'm going to get the same parentheses, and in this case we did y minus 4 and y minus 4. So now think back to this example on the previous slide. When we looked at this example, the common term is the x plus 4 and the x plus 4, so we divided that whole in parentheses out, so we're left with 3x minus 4. We're going to do that again in this type of problem. So our new GCF is the parentheses. So we're going to take the y minus 4 out of the equation. What am I going to be left with? I'm going to be left with, if I take this y minus 4 out, I'm left with y squared. If I take this y minus 4 out, I'm left with plus 2. Here's the problem now, factored using the grouping method. I'm going to stop there, and we'll pick back up with the next movie.